Hello and welcome to the third and final of our sessions today, and a big hello to anyone who is just joining us. My name is Hannah Hartley and I'm one of the project teams supporting Without Walls, the UK's largest consortium of outdoor arts festivals dedicated to commissioning and touring new outdoor work and supporting the ambition of artists. This virtual symposium is organised in partnership between Without Walls and Wild Rumpus and forms part of the Without Walls Creative Lab programme, a series of creative laboratories designed to allow for in-depth examination of identified sector topics. The outcomes and learning from each laboratory will be documented and shared with all Without Walls partners and the wider sector. We received more than 170 registrations from 10 countries for today's symposium, and it's great to see that so many of you are watching right now. Before we proceed with this session, I would like to run through a few practicalities. Our panel today features a range of speaker presentations and will be followed by a chaired discussion with all of the presenting speakers. This programme will take place in Hopin. Presentations are broadcast here on the stage, and the following discussion will take place in sessions, which you can find by following the link on the left-hand menu. This session is the final session in today's programme and will run until 5:50 UK time, which is 1 hour and 50 minutes in total. It will include a 15-minute break between the presentations and following discussion. During this screen break, the live stream will be paused, but the event will remain open for you to continue interacting through the chat function. Don't worry, because we're recording all of today's programme, and so these recordings will be available to watch again following the symposium. You will see two chat boxes. Please use the event chat to say hello, who you are and where you're from, so that other participants can see who is present. You're also encouraged to submit questions for the panellists in the stage chat, and I will be monitoring this throughout the presentations. We'll aim to pose as many of your questions as we can to our speakers during the following discussion. Please feel free to comment, post and tweet about this event using the hashtag #CreativeLab, and make sure to follow Without Walls and Wild Rumpus on social media, as we will be sharing follow-up content and resources. Finally, for access purposes, and for any viewers for whom English is not their first language, we're providing live captioning in BSL all day. To follow the captions, simply visit the link we've shared in the event chat. So without further ado, I would now like to ask Simon Chatterton to come to the stage to start today's session. Simon is an independent producer and the strategic lead for 101 Outdoor Arts, one of the UK's foremost outdoor arts creation centres. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, as Hannah says, I currently run 101, where we welcome hundreds of artists every year to stay with us and make work for the outdoors. So this is going to be a fascinating conversation for us. It's been a great day so far, and we've had some really powerful and I think really thought-provoking conversations so far. And to add to this, I'm going to have with me four amazing artists and producers from across the UK. We're going to hear from Wendy Hesketh Ogilvie from Wired Aerial Theatre, Alison Holder from Tallowa, Andrew Kim from Thingamajig, and Barney White from Acroju. Our contributors are here to discuss the theme of integrating sustainability into our creative outputs, which I will take as loosely meaning how we can tackle environmental issues through making great shows. Each of our presenters has 10 minutes to talk about their experiences of using storytelling and sustainable narratives in their shows, and to explore how they've balanced thematic and practical considerations in the bid to produce sustainable new work. We're on a very tight schedule in this session, so without any delay, I'd like to hand over to Wendy to start her presentation.
Hi, thank you, Simon, and hi, everybody. I just wanted to kind of say what everybody else has said, which is I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm just going to share my story. So I'm the Artistic Director of Wired Aerial Theatre, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen now and talk you through a show we created 10 years ago called As the World Tipped. So bear with. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So, As the World Tipped, we created 10 years ago, and it was Wide Aerial Theatre's very first, and still is, our own and only large-scale show. So there was an awful lot of lessons learned in creating this all those years ago. Now, this show came about because I was really frustrated about not being able to do vertical wall work as often as I wanted to, and in a kind of like, it was very difficult to get ownership of a building. And then when you got ownership of a building, it's very difficult to have the amount of audience that you needed to allow the show to happen to that amount of people. So Jamie, the technical director of our company, created a piece of set which looks like this, and it was designed so that it could be a stage that we danced on when it was horizontal, but it could also tip and go vertical and then be lifted meters into the air to continue working on as a vertical wall performance area. Now, at the same time as doing this, Without Walls offered funding opportunities to be able to create and investigate large-scale show ideas. And so we went to them and we applied for money, and we were successful. And with the money, we worked with Nigel Jameson, who is a creator of large-scale epic-sized work, or more often than not with amazing messages in what he does, global political themes. And we thought, if we've got such an epic stage design, we would have an amazing narrative or theme to go with it if we were to work with Nigel. So we used the money to create a mini version of the wall, and we set that up. It was a 6 metre by 6 metre truss structure with a fabric wall on one side. And we operated that via manual winches within our warehouse. And then we also created a mini version, what you can see on this photograph here, which is we invested many pounds in a toy crane and did a wooden version of the wall so that we could work remotely with Nigel, who was based in Australia, to be able to show him how we would maneuver this piece of set in the air, how it would tip, how it could be lifted, and all the different uses that we thought it might enable us to work on it thematically. So the idea of spending this research and development time was to find the narrative or the theme of what we would use with this set, and in doing so we'd understand what sense of scale of the show we would achieve. And at the end of it, basically Nigel came back, he looked at all the footage and he said, we're going to use your set design as a metaphor for a tipping stage. And that's where As the World Tipped was born. And we knew that we had a large-scale show. We knew that it was going to be talking about climate change. It was a fireable set piece. It needed to be lifted by a crane. It would have lights and projection. We were hoping that it would tour globally, of which it has done. And we would have cast and crew of up to 21 people on the road. And all of those things are pretty big things to consider, especially when you've got a theme of climate change at the heart of what you're doing. So with anything that we do, personally, the first thing I do is I become massively afraid and fearful of it. And so in listing my fears, I was really worried that because we had a design of a set and Nigel had the idea of climate change, I had a serious kind of moment where I thought, I don't know enough about climate change to be able to do a show that is based upon it. And so I turned myself into a bit of a scientist for quite a while. And because I wanted to escape people thinking that I was a fraud creating a show that was about climate change, and it wasn't what I'd originally thought it was going to be about. And bearing in mind the other fear that I had, which is wearing too many hats, artistic director of Wide Aerial Theatre, which brings its own things in a very first attempt at a large-scale show, aerial director on As the World Tipped, which when you work like we do, I do an awful lot of mental preparation to our artists. And if you think about the fact that I've got people that trust me with their lives that are dangling underneath a structure that we've designed that's dangling in itself off of a crane. There was an awful lot of mental preparation that I had to really focus on doing so that we were all ready for it. In addition to this, that I'd chosen, and I very much wanted to be a performer in the show. So there were lots of hats to wear, and there is only so much that one person personally can do. I was also very nervous of the fact that we were creating a large-scale show that essentially had a crane in it that was holding quite a lot of steel and aluminium, and we were talking about climate change. And so I was really nervous that people would point the finger and say that we didn't have the right amount of knowledge, or it was two ends of the spectrum, and how could you put that on one stage? So in order to calm my fears, there are different things that kind of came on board. Without Walls so very kindly allowed us to work with Maggie Clark, who is the producer for the show, and both when she covered all of those elements of the production, producing it, she also provided emotional support to me, which was incredible, coming back to the amount of hats that I was trying to wear. We also were very honest with the fact that there were massive gaps in our knowledge and things that we needed to learn. However, we might not be able to learn all of those things in the time that we had. Kind of touching back on what other people have said, and time is a really big factor in all of this. So we worked with Julie's Bicycle to ascertain where we were presently with our carbon footprint and how we toured and all those considerations. And they were really understanding and very softly with us to help us realise that it was not shameful what we were doing, and tried to help us to reduce what we were doing as much as we could. We also engaged scientists who helped us to speak to us in the language that we understood when it came to trying to talk about climate change from an artist perspective. Nigel Jameson himself is an absolute activist in climate change, and so there was no lack of knowledge from his side of things, and I soaked up as much as I could. And we made sure that the people that were wearing particular hats were the right hats, and if we didn't have the hats for the heads for those hats, then we would get them. And then I suppose really, because we are running out of time, just to fast track, when you're dealing with a show that is so large scale, and essentially you are using a crane and hunking some steel all around the world, I suppose what I really wanted to say is that you have to believe in the content, or I wholeheartedly believe in the content. And when we created this show, we did so using real footage from news reports of extreme weather conditions. We contacted Gideon Mendel and asked for the use of his photographs from the Pakistan floods. We also got access to Home, the film by Jan Artrus Bertrand. And the way that we stage the show is to inject the performers to work in animation and in complete alongside the film. And I feel that I'm in it. And in doing so, I'm hoping that the audience also feel that the message is incredibly real, and although they're not touching it, they are part of it. And so the message and the sensation of the show, I would hope, when you're performing to 12,000 people in Sydney Festival, that it kind of offsets how we got to Sydney with the message that it leaves the audience with. I do hope that I've managed to get my ideas across. I really, really do. Let me see if I can get you back and stop sharing the screen. There we go.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Fascinating insight into a hugely impactful show, and one of the real success stories of UK outdoor arts over the last decade. Really fascinating to hear about that journey you've been on as well, in terms of just needing to feel validated and in the knowledge that you had about your subject, something I'm sure which stops a lot of us from taking the actions we'd like to take to bring climate change to people's attention. from one of the established shows of the last 10 years to a show that was fresh out of the box very recently. Can I introduce Alison Holder, who's producer with Tallowa Theatre, whose show the Tide was such a great piece of work by such an interesting, diverse company. Alison.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much, Simon, and thank you everybody for allowing me to be here today. It's a pleasure to share the details of the Tide with you. I'm also going to share my screen, so let's see if that will work. I'm hoping you can see that. So my name's Alison Holder. I am the producer for Tallowa Theatre Company. And for those of you that don't know, Tallowa Theatre Company is the UK's primary Black-led touring theatre company. Our work is informed by a wealth of diversity of the Black British experience, cultivating the best in emerging and established Black artists. We inspire dialogue with and within communities across the UK and internationally. By doing so, we enrich the cultural life of all. We collaborate with theatres across the country. So here's some examples. King Lear was a co-production with the Royal Exchange Theatre. Super Ho, written and performed by Nicole Leckie, was co-produced at the Royal Court. And Half Breed.
Alison, sorry, I'm just going to stop you 1 second. Your screen share hasn't worked. I wonder if you're able to give it another try.
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon. Is that sharing now?
No, is that the monitor with the red line through it? I don't know.
Yes, it doesn't seem to be. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try again. Sorry, everybody. No
worries. Okay.
Does this?
Can
you see the screen?
Oh, yeah. Here we go. Brilliant. Fantastic. We're
okay. Okay. So we've talked about the productions. So Tallowa will be celebrating our 35th birthday in 2021, and we will revisit a wealth of actors, writers, directors who have collaborated with Tallowa, including Michaela Cole, Roy Williams, Kwame Kwame, Mallory Blackman, and Sharon D. Clark. So I'm here to talk to you about the Tide. It was the first time in its 33-year history that Tallowa was asked to commission a piece for outdoor performance exclusively. And we engaged with artists whose background isn't traditional theatre. So the Tide explores the narratives and experiences of migration within the UK. The initial idea was a dinghy washed up on a shore, bringing migrants whose homelands are being eroded by climate change and conflict. The imagery, the idea of using Brighton Beach, which is where our first performance was a dinghy actually being washed ashore with the migrants upon it facing arrival, whether that's relief of having survived the crossing, fear and trepidation, but hope for a new life, a welcome, a non-welcome, and integration. And this is what Jade Hackett, the co-creator and movement director, wanted to explore, and indeed she did in the initial R&D. But all of that changed with the Windrush scandal. This was a scandal as second-generation immigrants impacted us directly. This inhumane scandal affected people we actually knew. So the script was flipped, and we wanted to unpack this scandal and the effect Brexit was having. So I'd like to just share with you the trailer for the piece, which hopefully do an idea of the full energy of it, and I'm hoping the music will come through with it as well.
human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Immigrants. British men and women. They come to seek work. Denied their right to exit. Too many immigrants in this country. Finding out ways which today's community can work to play happily together.
So Jade Hackett, her intention was that the tide is now a very different take on the concept of immigration. It's a raw take on what this topic means to a lot of people, the experience of what it means to be a migrant in Britain, and ultimately it's done to provoke discussion and thought, raising much more awareness, which it did. Our co-creator Jade Hackett and Ryan Callan-Cameron brought together a wonderful cast that were a mix of Black British from the African diaspora, White British, Ethiopian and Jamaican. And this cast led to intense discussion during creation and rehearsal, because it was important for all to understand migration through different lenses, each bringing their own experiences. So I'll stop sharing and that will hopefully, let's see, come back to me. So, can you all see me again? I just wanted to make sure that I was back. So the live drumming element allows for a visceral response. There was discussion surrounding if this piece would translate to communities that don't have a large immigration population as we went on the road. But of course, immigration comes in many different shades, despite what we are led to believe by some of the media. The response at the end of each performance it just took us by surprise. We had people coming up to us, holding on to us, people from Eastern Europe, from Portugal, from Canada, from Australia, telling us that this was their experience of the immigration process in the UK, how they were made to feel unwelcome, how it was a frustrating experience, and how they're still trying to integrate. There would not normally be an opportunity for an immediate response at the end of our productions like this if we were inside a theatre. So a more structured Q&A might not have revealed such emotional responses. So it really informed the work that we were doing, and we knew that we were then on the right track. We hope to tour again in 2021, perhaps with what the world has gone through, which has affected every human being. There may be a little bit more empathy towards our fellow human. I know Jade will definitely want to go back to explore the original concept of the channel crossing of migration. The recent tragedy of the 16-year-old Sudanese boy who drowned with very little outcry is all the more urgent to share a creative response so that we don't grow immune to these stories. Social justice issues are inherently part of the conversation on sustainability. Tallower is a Black-led theatre company. We hear from our cultural diaspora who are especially vulnerable to climate change and how it affects local people. But we feel safer to explore this on our own terms in a creative way. Yet Tallower is a primarily artist-led, and so climate change and sustainability might be a subheading for when an artist wants to deal with immediate issues which affect their everyday life in the UK, such as stop and search and death in police custody. But more increasingly, there is a need to explore Black positivity and Black joy as well. The Tide was our first go at outdoor arts, and we have much more to learn and more we wish to explore with an audience who may not have seen Tallower's work. So for us, the future is very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alison. And really exciting and encouraging, I think, when you hear artists venturing outside for the first time, just talk about the power that the piece can have on the public and the way that you can receive such direct feedback. I mean, a couple of other things that also really struck me was how the Tide is a piece that is unashamedly issue-based, but very, very enjoyable and accessible for an audience on a number of levels. And also, I think a nice, a really nice illustration of the way that you can be live in the process of creating a piece to current events, and just the power of the resonance that can have when a show touches a chord which is already in the public's awareness. Got to move on now, so I'm going to pass us over to Andrew Kim, director of Thingamajig, and who people probably saw the fantastic double-page spread that Andrew had in the Guardian the other day. But here he's going to give us a bit of a rundown on the work that Thingamajig makes so beautifully. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking part in this symposium. Even in this year, with the pandemic and the looming cliff of no-deal Brexit and the possibility of 4 more years of Donald Trump, I believe climate change is the biggest challenge we all have to face. Increasingly, we see that that what we do in the next 8 to 10 years will decide our fate. And I'm guessing that the fact that you are here means that you are concerned about this too. So how do we do this as artists and event makers? How do we affect change? Change needs to happen on a deep societal level, but it doesn't happen overnight, and change needs to happen one person at a time. And so this is where perhaps the artist can come in. I'm gonna share my screen. Give me, there we go. Great. All right, and I'll go to this. Oh, sorry, it's there we go. All right. So what story do you tell? A good artist can reflect the world back in an engaging, beautiful, entertaining way. We can create images and tell stories that introduce characters who enact the bigger struggles and conflicts of the day. In street theater, the visuals and the sounds draw the audiences in. You engage their imagination, and once they give you their attention, you have the opportunity to take them on a journey. No one wants to be preached to, but if you create a compelling and space for empathy, I think an audience can broaden their hearts and minds and spark meaningful conversations. In Ghost Caribou, we have 2 part animal, part spirit giant puppets that roam a nighttime street. They draw a crowd when and as they bring them into an open space, they perform a folk dance and then share a shadow show about the loss of habitat. The performers and the show seems to come from another time and a faraway place to show that the choices we make here affect the lives of the caribou and other creatures elsewhere. On the other hand, on the one hand, it's a simplistic interpretation of the news or an article you might click on Facebook, but if the images and sounds and sacredness of the performance space open in you a sense of mystery, perhaps a different part of your heart might step forward and hold that information. In another piece we do, Kit and Caboodle, we tell the story of migration through puppet shows built into a pack mule. We believe that if we can humanize the stories of these epic journeys, we can connect to their humanity and practice empathy, which is sadly lacking in how we consume media content. For instance, we ask, is there a difference in hearing about refugee children from Syria who have been separated from their families to British evacuees in World War II? What materials do we use? One of the biggest struggles for makers concerned about climate change is the use of new materials. We as a society are using up the Earth's resources much faster than the Earth can create them. This is not sustainable, and we are seeing the effects of this now. We must find a way to buy less stuff. But how does this work for artists who have new stories to tell? One way is that we try to create art with materials that have already had a first use. At Thingamajig, we sculpt our puppets using clay, which we reuse over and over again. This is a puppet that we made recently for an Extinction Rebellion action, made with Alison Duddle and myself. I like to think that the clay carries the spirit of each of the creatures it's formed. And then we use paper mache. This is often from a paper surplus from cardboard making factories. We get materials from scrap stores, which sell industrial surplus as much as we can. This is a useful website called reusefuluk.org. If you don't know it already, it tells you shops that sell these industrial surplus. It's really worth taking the time to see what's in your area. Ask other artists, ask teachers, they'll know. You'll save money, it's better for the planet, and unexpected materials might give you some exciting design ideas. However, there's no escaping using new materials, making a new puppet. There's glue and cable ties and wire and staples and paint, and it's all new materials, and oftentimes it's from fossil fuel materials. So for some of our puppets, because of the size of it, or because they need to be waterproof, or they need to be lanterns, we do use plastizote, which is a foam, or warbler, which is a thermoplastic. But I think some new materials are unavoidable when it comes to making a new show, but this shouldn't stop you from trying to find reusable or second life materials whenever possible. This was a sea monster we made for an opera last year. The foam head, the head is foam because of its weight, but the body here is made from recycled carrier bags I grabbed from a local Tesco's. How do we tour? Being a theater company, traveling is a requirement to bringing our work to audiences. We try to be as efficient as possible. All our shows fit into our low-top, short-wheelbase Ford Transit van. Most shows are 2 performers, but if we require a 3rd performer, we try to use train travel for the 3rd performer whenever possible. We have a newer van, so it's a bit more fuel efficient, but unfortunately it is diesel like most vans, and we are currently saving each month for a new electric or hybrid touring van. We're hoping by the time that we can afford our next van, the battery technology will have improved so that it's feasible for the kind of touring that we do. One of the big changes we've made at Thingamajig is that we are being much more careful about flying. In the past, we've been keen to perform internationally. We've performed in over 15 countries, and some years, international work has been 25% of our earnings. But though we enjoy meeting new people and seeing how people work in different places, we know that flying has a huge cost on our climate. I think everybody needs to make your own decisions, but for us, we've decided to have a threshold. We now only fly for projects where we're working with communities or artists for at least 1 week. And these are events where we're teaching or learning something that wouldn't be possible without that travel. So instead, we are no longer interested in 1 or 2 day gigs which require flying, but may consider a 3-week giant puppet workshop like this one in Plovdiv, Bulgaria. In this project, I was not only teaching, but I was also a puppet maker and stilt walker and parade consultant, and I was also able to attend an annual festival of cookery, their amazing tradition of mummers. And so it was a good example of the merits of travel, where I taught new artists and I also learned traditional skills there. In contrast to this, we have stopped quoting for weekend gigs, for instance, for a shopping mall in Dubai or a festival in Thailand. For some, any flying is not acceptable, and I support them on this, but in the same way that I've given up meat but still enjoy a bit of cheese now and then, we all need to listen to the science and do our very best to respect the journey of all of those around us. In the end, we also calculate our travel, van expenses, and flights, and we make a donation to carbon offsetting programs, and we also volunteer at a local tree planting charity. It doesn't absolve us from flying or traveling in a diesel van, but it does make us much more aware of our carbon footprint. Last year, Thingamajig put 10.4 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The silver lining is that it'll be a lot less in 2020. That's not a very funny joke, is it? We're not perfect. We all live in this world where it's impossible not to use fossil fuels and plastic sometimes, but this can't stop us from trying our very best. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope it will encourage you to consider how to make all the stages of making and sharing your work a little bit kinder to the earth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, really interesting to hear about one company who's put a line in the sand, really, about flying. You know, it's even if we can't give up everything that damages the environment, then those kind of personal judgments about how far we're prepared to go seem really important. Thanks also for those points you were making earlier about empathy, the ability of artists to create empathy, the way we can engender meaningful conversations with our audience. I hope we're going to have time in our second session to open up some of those things further. But in the meantime, I'd just like to hand over to somebody from one of the country's most established and successful small-scale companies over the last few years. Barney White, can we hear from you?
Yes, you can, Simon. Thanks very much. And hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into the symposium. What an exciting thing this is to be having this conversation. So for anyone that doesn't know, my name is Barney White, and I'm Creative Director and Performer at Acrojou. We are an acrobatic theatre company, and we've been creating and touring outdoor work across the UK and internationally for the past 15 years. So today I'm going to talk to you about how we can potentially affect behavioural change in our audiences through the content of our productions, and how we can balance environmental accountability with artistic integrity. So we really believe in the power that free outdoor art has to offer, and the incidental nature of how many people experience it can go a huge way to getting them to engage with both art in general and the stories we're telling in a different way. Now, my favourite part of touring our work is talking to audiences after the shows. As our work is mostly non-verbal, it's created in a way that leaves room for some ambiguity, which in turn allows audiences to fill in the gaps with their own opinions and experiences, and people almost always want to tell you or ask you what they thought the show was about afterwards. And I find it fascinating to see how people interpret the shows, as it will change from person to person and region within the UK. And when this is filtered through the lens of another culture entirely, this reaction is magnified into wonderful and sometimes truly bizarre interpretations of the work, which brings us in a roundabout way to the sticky subject of travel, as Andrew was just talking about. Now, it's an undeniable fact of the world we live in today that air travel is inextricably linked with industry and the economy. However, travel and experiencing the world is incredibly important for the development of culture and our ability to communicate with those different to us. And my personal experiences of traveling to different countries has changed fundamentally how I see the world and how I interact with people and the art I create as a result. And experiencing and understanding different cultures is unfortunately especially important in the world we live in today. And this makes it a tricky trade-off for artists and people in general. Now, there are obviously small steps we can take to make sure that we're creating sustainably, like making sure we source sustainable materials, being conscious of waste, recycling, etc. But when doing some digging for this talk, the main factor in how small companies can alleviate or limit their carbon output was, of course, optimizing travel. So to prepare for this talk, I spoke with a friend who was in their final year of studying climate change at university. And the one thing they impressed on me was the idea that the scale of action makes all the difference. So in terms of what small companies or individuals can do, they suggested the main day-to-day way to help was through pooling travel and offsetting through carbon offset programs or traveling by train where possible. But recognizing the scale of the problem is important. Significant change is only going to be achieved through the development of cleaner technology and its adoption through different industries. And artists can support and spread this message. The other important thing we can do is to invest, for example, by donating a small percentage of your income to initiatives like sustainable energy research, environmental protection, social justice organizations. However, having done my time as a fledgling company in the early days, I fully understand that money is rarely spare. So what can we do? Well, as artists in 2020, we had the platforms and capacity to advocate for and spread the work of organizations and institutions that are actively working to solve climate change. And it's easy to forget that social media is storytelling, and it's at our fingertips all the time, especially considering how life is shaping up at the moment. Approaching organizations and charities is also a good idea, as some of them may be either willing to partner with you on an idea or even invest some funding. And sharing and supporting the work of these organizations in tandem with your own work is potentially a very powerful combination, and it's honestly not something I've seen a lot of. And this is also a conversation, I think, for our sector as a whole. How can we collectively do more to promote these ideas while supporting artists to create and tour in a sustainable way? As the admin and logistics side of striving to be sustainable, especially at an early stage of a company, can really inhibit your artistic process. So what about the content of our work? Now, I've read a few articles about whether the communication on climate change should turn from focusing on the science or to communicate emotionally. While it's certainly vital that more people understand the basic science and that its place in public education grows, because we have to stand up to this worryingly large anti-science trend that's raising its head at the moment. But that aside, climate change is still largely presented through the vocabulary of science. And this poses a fundamental problem with how people process the reality of what's happening. And it comes down to empathy and the relatability of an idea. This is why art and culture are fundamental to connecting people on this issue. The concepts of climate change remain largely abstract. We can care deeply about the degradation of the ozone and pollution of the seas, but unless we're able to individually relate to information we're presented with, this impact has limitations. So how we represent climate change in art is important to explore, as it obviously covers a much wider range of issues than we're used to seeing in mainstream representation. Wildfires, rising sea levels, like we just discussed, these images, although they're devastating, have become so commonplace that it doesn't touch the sides for most people. To shake this up, I think we need to start telling stories from across the whole gamut of climate-related issues, of which there are many, including some people may not be aware of, as it also takes in issues like inevitable climate migration, institutional racism, human rights, the increased likelihood of the spread of new diseases and food shortages, to name a few. So I think there's great power in examining what areas of climate change we're investigating and representing through art to again challenge audiences' views of what they're considering when they talk and think about climate change. Which is where this idea of creating empathy is critical. There are so many human level stories about what's happening now and what will eventually happen 10, 20 years down the road. There's a story there for everyone. And this is where art and performance excels, creating stories of how we exist in the world and with each other. So on a practical or creative level, when putting a piece together, I imagine almost everybody thinks, okay, so what are we saying with this? What do we want to say? What's our message? Because for sure, that needs establishing so that you can physically create a performance. But for me, the more important question is to say, what do we want people to feel when they watch this? What emotional response do we want to provoke? What makes us feel that way? What experiences have we had that brings that out in us? And then you build the show and the narrative out from there. Because creating work from an honest place and sticking to that is a really powerful thing. And we feel naturally there is some separation between performer and audience, which in a sense, of course, there is. But in reality, there's no wall there. We all share the same Venn diagram of life experiences, and that's what enables work to connect with people. And that's what we need to tap into when we're creating work around an issue like climate change. But just as important as balancing the heavy reality of these situations is imbuing a sense of optimism. So this is a quote from a TED Talk by a guy called Ben Twist. Art can take contradictory ideas, which otherwise we would not normally allow to be together, and puts them in creative tension. We want everything that we have now, but we want it carbon-free. Here we have two absolutely irreconcilable ideas. Let's put them together and see what happens. Art thrives on that. Art can imagine different futures and look forward to an almost unimaginable world. Now, that TED Talk is called Why the Arts Are Essential in Addressing Climate Change by Ben Twist. So I check it out because it's really interesting. But his point is, as artists, we must imagine the impossible working. This imaginary landscape is where art thrives, and why work in science fiction is a prime example of this, with stories inspiring the ideas that would eventually become submarines and mobile phones, among others. So if I had one takeaway opinion to give you, it would be that if you're choosing to confront or shine a light on climate change, or any crisis for that matter, if you're choosing to lift up this subject through art, then your priority should be focusing on your craft and creating honestly to elevate that story, while being environmentally conscious and supporting direct action where you can. The biggest enemy of art is admin and logistics, so try not to let this distract you. As humans, it's our moral responsibility to live as sustainably as we can. As artists, it's our responsibility to create meaningful work that engages people to think. So, like any good presentation, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein. Stories create magic and a sense of wonder at the world. Stories teach us about life, about ourselves, and about others. If you want your children to be smart, tell them stories. If you want them to be brilliant, tell them more stories. Art doesn't need to solve climate change, but it does have the power to change minds. Thank you. And that's my 9-minute alarm going off.
Thank you very much, Barney. You saved me. That was great, and sets us up, I think, really nicely for the next session. Which, for those of you who can make it, are going to look at some of those questions that Barney touched on about, how we deliver. How we deliver content to audiences about science versus emotion, good news, pictures of gloom, imagining different futures, and that word which seemed to come up for several of the speakers today about empathy, how we create that with audiences and stimulate them to think and feel differently about the world. So thank you very much to all our presenters. Thank you to everybody who's been in this session. We're running a little over, so I'm going to leave you all now to have a few minutes coffee break, and then we'll be back in the room again at 4 o'clock. See you soon.